probably have to veto, and it's not going to be overturned, and we're going to have our whole thing. It's been, the legal scholars all say it's totally constitutional.
Today's votes cap a week of something the American people haven't seen enough of in the past 2 years. Both parties in the United States Congress standing up to Donald Trump. The United States of America has no king, and we never will.
The president is operating within existing law, and the crisis on our border is all too real.
Well, before this vote on this resolution about the national emergency along the border, the president tweeted out, a vote for today's resolution by Republican senators is a vote for Nancy Pelosi, crime, and the open border Democrats. Well, there were 12 senators on the GOP side who voted on the Trump emergency declaration to block it. There you see them there. Two of them caught people's eyes. Tom Tillis voted for this resolution. He said he was going to vote against it. And Ben Sasse, both are up for re-election. After the vote that was 59 to 41, the president tweeted out, veto, and then said he looks forward to vetoing the just passed Democrat-inspired resolution which would open borders, increase crime, drugs, and trafficking in our country. I thank all the strong Republicans who voted to support border security and our desperately needed wall. With that, let's bring in our panel. Byron York, chief political correspondent of the Washington Examiner. Susan Page, Washington bureau chief at USA Today. And Matthew Continetti, editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon. You know, this is an exercise, it seems, in that they're not going to have the votes to override a veto, at least not yet, just doing the head counts. But it sends a message to the court, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the White House feels very confident that they're going to win this, that the president's veto will not be overturned. But beyond that, you can really look at this in a couple of ways. As a matter of principle, we have had 12 Republican senators reject the president's position, saying he is overreaching his executive authority. That's, I think, the biggest rejection, Republican rejection, we've seen of the president so far in this presidency. So that is a big deal, even if the veto can't be overturned. But as a practical matter, as far as the border barrier is concerned, it can go ahead. The president proposed to take money from three sources, what Congress had already appropriated for the wall, a Treasury forfeiture fund, and a military fund, all of which do not require an emergency declaration. So he can go ahead and use that. There was a fourth source of money that even if the Congress forbade him to use it, he could still go ahead with the other three.
So just so we're clear, the resolution blocks the national emergency declaration. When I said Tom Tillis and Ben Sasse, these are people who spoke out against the national emergency declaration but voted against this resolution today.
Tom Tillis didn't just speak out against it. He wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post that said it would be intellectually dishonest not to vote against the president's declaration because he had opposed similar actions by President Obama when he was in the White House as an overreach of presidential authority. And yet he flipped on this. You know, it's interesting, 12 Republican senators voted against the president on this, but of the 10 Republican senators who are up for re-election next year, 9 of them voted with the president. The only Republican senator up for re-election next year who defied the president on this was Susan Collins of Maine.
Here's Kirstjen Nielsen, the Homeland Security Secretary.
I really fear for our democracy when the body who creates the laws is telling the body who enforces the law, just don't enforce the law. If they don't like the law, they should change it. But the men and women at the Department of Homeland Security have sworn an oath to protect communities, to secure the homeland, and to enforce the law that Congress passed.
So it seems like we're going to have this battle back and forth about policy.
Right. It's a double abdication because not only has Congress not done anything about the crisis on the border, it also delegated the authority with the National Emergencies Act 40 years ago to the president to create these sorts of, declare these sorts of emergencies. I think there are two issues. The first issue is what's happening on the border. Is it an emergency? I think so. We've had a change in the nature of immigration from single males looking for jobs to family units showing up on the border en masse and asking for asylum. And the system is broken. The New York Times and the Washington Post both say so. There's a second issue, which is a constitutional issue, which is, does the president have the authority to repurpose this money that Congress has not specifically appropriated for the wall? And there, I think, reasonable people can disagree. What I don't understand are the Democrats who deny the existence of a crisis on the border, and at the same time hope that the courts uphold Trump's effort to declare an emergency because they want to use the powers themselves for climate change or gun control. And that is being intellectually dishonest.
Yeah, and some of the same Democrats who talked about a barrier or a wall, like Chuck Schumer back in 2006. I want to turn briefly to this other, as we're waiting for the Mueller report to come forward, whenever that is, as Washington's on pins and needles here. The House votes 420-0 to force this report out into the public to be released. It is currently being blocked by Senator Lindsey Graham. We're not sure exactly why. What about this and whether it's going to come out?
Well, the sense of the Congress is pretty clear. 420-0 is pretty darn clear. And of course it is going to come out. I mean, after
one way or another.
Of course, after everything that has happened, is Mueller going to be able to write a report and give it to the Justice Department and then they say, we're sorry, you can't see this? That will simply not fly. So it will come out, and as a matter of fact, I think there'll be a push for not only whatever his report is, but for his actual underlying information as well, like testimony.
And one of the key prosecutors today has moved on. The top prosecutor, Andrew Weissman, stepping down, at least in coming days.
Hey, one more sign that, as we've been saying for several months, the Mueller report is just about to come out any day now.
Almost. It's almost here.
Okay, here's the story of the evening. Will the 12 Republican senators voting against President Trump's national emergency before the border, will they get hurt at the ballot box? Rejected by voters, President Trump saying the White House saying the president will not forget this when it comes time to do fundraising for members of the Republican Party. Here's the president tweeting out, quote, "A vote for today's resolution by Republican senators is a vote for Nancy Pelosi, for crime and the open border Democrats. This, as a very frustrated union for ICE Border Patrol officials, sent a letter to the White House saying the catch and release of illegals is now in overdrive. Thousands of illegals now being released en masse into the U.S. to make room for new border crossers, including a previously deported gang member with a long criminal history. He is now accused of viciously stabbing and beating to death a woman inside her home in San Jose, California, where the police are not allowed to cooperate with ICE." Let's bring in Arizona Congresswoman Debbie Lesko. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. You know, Congresswoman, thoughts and prayers don't cut it anymore. And that's not enough for victims' families like this one.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. This is a travesty, what happened to this woman by an illegal alien murdering an innocent woman. And this insanity has to stop. I support President Trump. There is an emergency at our border. There's thousands and thousands of people and families flooding over our border. I'm from Arizona. I've met with Secretary Nielsen just this week a couple times. This is an emergency. We need to stop it, and I support the president.
You know, Dan Coates, the Director of National Intelligence, and President Obama's DNI, James Clapper, said what is happening south of the border, to your point, is a national emergency. Do you think this will hurt the Republicans, senators that voted against the president here?
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to hurt the senators or not. Obviously, everyone has to vote their conscience. I know that you said Nancy Pelosi is going to put this up for a vote. I know that I'm going to support the President of the United States. I know that there is an emergency at the border. Our number one job in the U.S. Congress is to protect the people in the United States, and this is exactly what the president is doing.
Okay, the Supreme Court ruled in 1993 the president does not have to return to Congress to reprogram or spend already appropriated money. The GAO backs him up on that. Here's the point. Presidents have declared national emergencies for Iran, for Nicaragua, for South Africa, for Libya, on and on. What's going on right at our own border is this. An annualized 1 million people expected to cross. 76,000 tried to cross illegally just last month. People dying from drugs pouring in. 10,000 children trafficked into the country. On and on and on. Your take on that?
Well, you're exactly right. And again, this is a national emergency. And other presidents have declared national emergencies in the past. This probably will be battled out in court. I think the president is going to win, and ultimately the nation is going to win. Part of the solution to securing the border at the southwest border is a fence. It's not the entire solution, and the president has never said that, but it's part of the solution. And unfortunately, Congress has not gotten its act together and changed immigration laws to slow down this flow of illegal immigration. So the president is doing what he has to do to protect the nation, and that's to declare a national emergency so that he can start building this border fence.
Here's why,
yes.
Congressman, final word. Here's why the border gang, the border officials, people, the men and women working to protect the border, here's why they say a wall works. They say because it directs the flow of people toward ports of entry where that's guarded and where you can catch the problems at the ports of entry, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's common sense. I've talked to Secretary Nielsen. That's exactly what she has said. It's part of the solution. I asked her straight out if we have an emergency at the southern border, and she answered yes. And these are from herself, who is very versed in this, plus the boots on the ground, the agents on the ground who see this day in and day out. They know there's an emergency, and they're supportive of the president.
Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, thank you so much for joining us.